So, this is the Solomon Kane role-playing game from Savage Worlds, and it is based on the works of Robert E. Howard, who wrote Conan, which I hadn't heard of the Solomon Kane until the movie came out, and it was only released, well, basically it wasn't released in the United States, but I still got to see it anyway, through Magic, and it's got people that worked on different games. Dave Bluer worked on another game that I liked. He worked on some different stuff for Feng Shui, and various other people. But I think Shane Lacey Hensley here is one of the main writers for, obviously, for Solomon Kane and Savage Worlds, and there's Paul Wade Williams. But Solomon Kane's a Puritan from the 15 and 1600s. He's kind of a pulp hero, kind of like Doc Savage or Alan Quatermain or, I guess, Indiana Jones for the 15 and 1600s. It's a pretty thick and solid book. It uses this pretty standard Savage Worlds system, which is everything's rated by a die type. Instead of having a static number, you have like a strength of D4 or whatever, and you roll it, and then you roll another die, usually a D6, unless you're really skilled at something, and then you get to roll a different die type. But it's got everything broken down pretty well. It's got a really long bunch of stuff on Solomon Kane and his stories, which there really weren't all that many, so they're real fanboys, whoever put this together. But it's got the character stuff and the arms and equipment and the game rules. Magic is really different than most games in this, because you're pretty much either a wizard or a shaman, or so basically native magic, or the stuffy, stuff in scrolls and things, and you don't have magic points or spells per day or anything. You roll against a target number, and it's possible that you can lose your magic or have some horrible mishap, but otherwise you don't have to worry about keeping track of magic points or any of that sort of thing, which I like. But even different than other Savage Worlds magic is that you have you don't throw fireballs or magic missile or anything like that in Solomon Kane. Everything is more ritualistic, and it takes a lot longer. The caster is actually able to decide how long he wants to take on spells, because you have pretty hefty negative modifiers to your casting. But the longer you take, the more positive modifiers you can build up. So you decide how many turns you want to spend, and that will counterbalance the negative modifiers until you're able to successfully cast your spells. I haven't had anybody play a caster yet in Solomon Kane, so I can't really report on that. And then it's got stuff on storytelling, creating adventures, and then specifically setting information, and it goes on into specific adventures and the Orient, and it's got really nice artwork. I guess it's specifically for this book. I don't know. But they cover their version of the Savage Worlds rules. They go into the edges, which are like advantages, and gear, and skills. See, you got gambling and guts and healing and all this. Now, the one thing I don't like about this, which is why I tell people to use the Savage Worlds basic rules first, or even their test drive rules, because they're first of all, they're more up to date. Solomon Kane's about a version behind right now, and it doesn't use exactly the same rules as the Explorer edition, which is the current Savage Worlds edition of the rules. I don't like this font, and I don't like the texture on the paper, on the PDF here. I really have a hard time reading this. The font itself and the normal body of the text is okay. It looks like Times, or I don't know exactly what all else is. Whatever the standard is for normal writing is okay, but these titles are awful. I really wasn't going to run Solomon Kane because I looked through it a number of times and thought, well, I would kind of like to try it because it was sort of like Warhammer, which that's what my group played. I used to run in, play Warhammer 1st and 2nd edition fantasy roleplay, but I didn't like the font set on this textured background at all because I couldn't read it. But someone talked me into running this, and although I don't have very many players in my game, it is popular, sort of. Everybody seems to like it, but I just think they should have gone with just regular fonts. I just don't see the point of this because it doesn't add anything, in my opinion. It's hard to read, or at least it slows it down. And you got hindrances, which give you points. I personally am not a fan of a lot of hindrances in a lot of games, and this is no exception. Some of them, like All Thumbs, are good. They'll give you penalties for doing technical things, and those are fine. But these other things, like Big Mouth and things, are just an excuse to have players have antisocial characters, and players don't need excuses for that. They have those without getting points to reward them for it. Bloodthirsty, your hero revels in carnage and cruelty. Do players really need that? Do I want to give my players points for that? They do that anyway. This would be great for players that are good role players, that can take that and actually do something interesting with it and use it in their character for the right reasons. But almost nobody does that. They take that because it gives them more pluses, as the Munchkin and real role player and all that old jokes go. Dependent, I mean, that could be interesting, having somebody you have to care for. And again, delusional. A lot of these, I don't like people taking. Cocky's kind of interesting. You could do that. But just a lot of these I don't like. Death Wish, it just makes you be suicidal. That can be done well, but so many players are that anyway. Like I said, the art in this is good. It really sets things out. A lot of it just seems to be red, but I guess maybe art was red in the 15th and 16th century. I don't know. Pacifist, I guess I see the point. I mean, it's part of the normal Savage Worlds rules, but I mean, it's not exactly a game about fighting, but it does have it. It is a pulp action game, so. And the minor pacifist is doable because it doesn't mean you don't fight at all. It just means you fight in self-defense, which that's pretty heroic. That's pretty standard. Most fighting heroes are the kind that, you know, they used to be violent and they've sworn off violence, but only until something dramatic happens, you know, as their story begins or picks back up for the reader or the viewer, and then they have to pick up the sword again or whatever. But the major one is you almost just don't involve yourself in combat at all, and I just don't see that, especially for a game like Solomon Kane. But I don't know. Some of these just don't make sense to me. But then again, I didn't read Solomon Kane, so I read a couple of the stories. I seem to do okay as a GM for it, so I guess I'm passable. The edges are good. Most of them are taken from Savage Worlds, so I'm not sure how faithful some of them are to the stories. I'm sure most of them are close or could be considered to work. I don't know. I guess there's giants. I'm sure there's all kinds of things that would work. And there's two-fisted, and I'm not sure about using a gun and a sword at the same time. I guess there is a two-fisted, and which is using two weapons without a penalty, so I guess it doesn't say that one is a melee and one is a ranged, but I guess you could interpret it however you want. And leadership edges, which I guess people that roleplay a lot use those. I haven't had anybody take any of those, but in any of the games of Savage Worlds I've run, which I've run Hellfrost and kind of just some generic fantasy, and now Solomon Kane. And I was going to run Rippers, which was a Victorian monster kind of game. And I think I had a couple of people make characters for that. Nobody took any leadership edges. Weird edges include Beastmaster and things like that. And wild cards. And it's pretty, I like Savage Worlds, and even Solomon Kane helpfully does this. They summarize your character creation, which there's not much to it, and I am very impressed with that. It's just you race, traits, you have 5 points to distribute between your main stats, which is strength, spirit, agility, vigor, and I don't know, something else. Wow, I totally forgot. But anyway, oh, there you go. Smarts, your intelligence. You got 5 stats, and you got 5 points to distribute between them. Then you have 15 points to spend on skills. Each die type and a skill costs 1, as long as you're below the linked attribute. Going over the linked attribute costs 2. That's pretty simple. Your charisma is actually a figured stat, and it's at 0 unless you get something that changes it. Your pace is 6. Parry is 2 plus half your fighting skill. So if you have no fighting skill, it's 2. Toughness is the same. It's equal to 2 plus half your vigor, which you always have vigor. And basically damage has to exceed your vigor or your toughness, or it won't do any damage. And edges and hindrances, you start with 1. Just for being a PC or a human. As a house rule, I give another one, but that's me. And then you can gain another one for taking a hindrance. You start with 5 pounds worth of gear, 5 British pounds, and you can fill in background details, and then you can level. And your load limit in Savage Worlds and in Solomon Kane is 5 times your strength in pounds, normal weight pounds, which you start out with a D4 strength. If you don't raise it, that means 20 pounds is your strength limit. You can only carry 20 pounds of equipment before you have an encumbrance penalty. I don't get that. Even for the weak character, a hero that can only carry 20 pounds is just, it doesn't make any sense to me. I know D4 is like a standard average person, but it seems like anybody could carry, as a hero, it seems like anybody could carry 50. Just, I don't know, I generally add 30 pounds to that. If they're, I don't know, but that's me. And there's your skills, that's all there is. Everything falls into those. Knowledge is a skill that you, I don't know what you would call it, a cascade skill or whatever. You pick what you have knowledge in, so you can have many different kinds of knowledges, like different sciences and things like that. So that one branches out, but there's only one fighting skill, for example. If you have fighting, it applies to all weapons, all melee weapons. If you have shooting, it applies to all ranged weapons, except for throwing, which is all thrown weapons. Taunt is special. It's for combat and quasi-combat, which is when you can antagonize somebody into doing something, even if you're not necessarily in combat. So they give you some extra, not really, you don't have to stick somebody in the ribs to do stuff in combat, so that allows for some clever players that aren't necessarily combat monsters. And there's summaries of the hindrances and edges, so that's nice, with the actual, the bonuses, and these things over here, your requirements. Although Solomon Kane doesn't use levels exactly like other games like D&D, there are ranks, or whatever you want to call them. Like N is novice, V is veteran, so you have to be for fleshy or whatever, you have to be a veteran and have agility of D8 and fight of D8 in order to take it. And I don't remember what it is offhand, but you have to see the text for it. Although I've looked it up, and I believe they could have put a summary of what it does. I'm not sure why they don't put some of the summaries. And some of these give you bennies, which they're like fate points. You can spend them during the game to get re-rolls and things like that, which is handy. But I kind of wonder, some of these games like Savage Worlds, I kind of wonder about some of them, because really they make it too easy in some ways. I haven't done a whole lot of damage to my player characters. I haven't really threatened them a whole lot, and I've run like 10 sessions for the group that I've got right now that I run for online in a chat room. And I ran for another group for about 4 sessions, and I ran, I think, twice for an offline group, and nobody has really taken any serious injuries, because these bennies allow you to do an awful lot. Reroll and soak wounds and things like that. I mean, they're good, and they let players be heroic, and you only get so many, you only get 3 or whatever, and then the GM is encouraged to give them back whenever players do clever things, and that's all good, but I don't know. To me, I hate to say that I'd like to go back to the days when you didn't get that sort of thing, and to other game systems where where the players don't have any say-so in situations, because I like players being able to make decisions like that and kind of use some strategy on their resources, but I don't know, it seems kind of anticlimactic to not be able to threaten the players sometimes. But some of that is the adventures I've been running. I've been surprised at how combat non-intensive Solomon Kane is. I really expected it to be a lot more action-oriented and pulpy, and there's been 1 or maybe 2 combats per adventure. I'm not complaining necessarily, I was just surprised. And there's all kinds of notes on selling goods, and you do have guns, pistols, and blunderbusses, and rifles, and of course they're the old kind, but I was really surprised at the adventures. A lot of it is well, yeah, I guess heavy in role-playing, or at least investigation. It's not necessarily heavy in role-playing interpersonal with the NPCs, where it's vitally important you role-play, but that you talk to them and find things out from NPCs, and you investigate, and the players puzzle things out, use some critical thinking, and come to conclusions. That is really the adventures I've ran for Solomon Kane, at least. That really is the most important part of those. And I've been very surprised at how intensive that is. And I've ran a 3-session, I've ran more than one 3-session game that has been only 1 session, usually the last, that's had combat, or has maybe had a brief combat at the start and then a combat at the end. So almost 2 sessions with no combat, which I'm not used to either as a player or a GM, and I was surprised the players were into it. But I guess I had good players. They have their share of charts, which is good, interesting stuff to buy. And they don't rely heavily on it, though. They just kind of, here it is, and they explain it. But it's not like some other games. They don't really get bogged down in it. And it tells about wild cards and extras, which player characters are wild cards. And that gives them extra rolls, or that extra D6 roll, which whenever you make a trait test, like if you're rolling against strength or you're doing a skill like fighting, you roll your die for your skill and you roll a d6 and you take the better of the two. And if you roll the max on a die, like a 6 on a d6, you roll again and add it to explode, or ace as they call it. And if you roll 4 above whatever your target number is, which is usually 4, except when you're fighting, which is whatever your opponent's parry is, you get an extra d6 in damage if you're in combat, or you get some sort of a special effect or special success. And extras don't get a number of wounds, they just get 1 wound, and if you manage to make them shaken, which is a status before a wound, if you manage to make them shaken and give them a wound, you get to kill them outright, which is neat, instead of having to have a room full of like kobolds with all of their own hit points. As long as you can make it past their 1 shaken status and wound them once, you can just kill them. I think that's how most games should be, with the mooks or the thugs, the nameless enemies, because that makes the characters more heroic. And there's the section on bennies and soak rolls, which whenever you're wounded you have to spend a benny and you can make a soak roll to reduce the damage, possibly up to 0, which is what happened last game I ran. Somebody took 2 wounds, but they made their soak roll really well and reduced it all the way to nothing. Which, I guess if you house ruled it, you could change that, but that's what soak rolls are for in bennies. So, and there's the advancement chart for you earn about 2 to 4 experience points per adventure. They say 2 is usual, 3 is for really good, but I consider, since my sessions tend to be at least 3, sometimes 5 hours online, I consider all of them to be worth at least 3 experience points. So it doesn't take long. I've got 1 seasoned player already. Every 5 experience points you get to buy an advance, which is an edge or 2 skills or whatever you want. And there's rules for allies. Usually the players can control the allies. I've been doing that so far because it's too much online, I think, to ask the players to control without having the character sheet and stuff in front of them. Movement, I abstract that because I don't use miniatures, because I use a chat room. I might use a virtual tabletop later, but and attacks for range, there's modifiers. I usually don't do anything with that. I might later if I go to a virtual tabletop. I've used the toughness before when enemies were trying to break through a door. They've got rules for everything. It's really a very compact game, Savage Worlds is, and Solomon Kane. Basically, Solomon Kane just rewrote the rules in their own unreadable font. And object toughness, again, I never understood exactly why they did that. And then they go into unarmed defender and unstable platform and different modifiers, and then tests of will and fear checks, and there's the actual combat stuff like damage and knockout blows and disarming your opponents and things like that, and more soak rolls, which I could have sworn I already went through that. And there's injury tables. You can get a busted leg and brain damage, and I think a lot of that is really kind of optional. And there's healing, which you can have normal skill healing, or oh, this may be for, I guess this might be for allies. It's been a little while since I looked through the core rules. Oh, there's a personality table. You do use a d20 like 3 times in the system. Otherwise, you don't use a d20. You just roll whatever the normal dice are, which only goes to d12 for most tests. And there's fatigue levels. You can be exhausted and fatigued and incapacitated. And that could happen from exposure to weather or lack of sleep or food. And drowning, heat, thirst. And there's fire and poison and fright. And there's a combat summary. I probably ought to have that printed out and available to my players. And then there's the magic section, and I think there's a religion section. I see there's like Banished Spirit is one of the spells or whatever. The rank is veteran, the casting modifier is -5, so if you have like let's see, this is based on your smarts, so if your smarts is d6, you'll roll a d6, and then because you're a wild card, you roll another d6, but then you subtract 5 from the roll, and you try to get a 4 or better. So you pretty much have to ace to get the dice to explode, each die rather, to explode, and then try to get above a 4. And the only way to increase this is to take extra turns, which will, I think, increase your modifier by +1 per turn. So that's why Magic and Solomon Kane will take longer. Most of the other Savage Worlds games aren't done like this. They just have a much lower casting modifier, or they all just have a casting target number of 4. But this actually has a modifier, which is unusual. Some of the spells are the same, like armor and barrier, but they've just done things differently, which is kind of interesting. I kind of like the way they did it, actually. It might be worth it to do it that way in other games. And they have, to their credit, they have gone through the spell list, changed things around, added their own, taken things out like Fireball and Blast and all those things that just don't really apply to Solomon Kane. Because the Magic is not about that sort of just crazy, over-the-top stuff in the Solomon Kane world. And there's, I don't know if I can, and there's the world of Solomon Kane, which is just the normal world. It's not a fantasy world or anything. And he was in, I think he was in England first, and he went all over, and the adventures in the book go all over too. And there's the art of storytelling, and they do pretty good. They actually give a lot of help and hints to the GM. And there's creating adventures and the plot and in media res and the middle, and they give some good advice. There's making villains and NPCs and personality, and it actually has an adventure generator, which a lot of the Savage Worlds books do. They're not very sophisticated. It's just a D6 and then the type of main villain you have, and then the type of goal he has and the hook to start the game off with. The GM still has to fill in all the details and connect it, but which I'm really not very good at, so I go elsewhere, or I use already done adventures, or I'm working on my own more complete version of this. But and there's for hired thugs and traits and turns, twists and turns. But at least they did include this. A lot of games don't do anything even this much to help out a GM, so I really consider this a high mark. And then this is actually Solomon Kane stuff. the thing's marked, I think with this symbol, whatever it is. It just says plot points are marked with the whatever symbol. I guess that's Solomon Kane's symbol. These other things are normal adventures for the PCs, and I guess these take place in the same place that he had actual adventures written by Howard. And I guess that's Solomon Kane there with his magic cat-headed staff and a sword and pistol. And this is the setting, fluff, and information on Puritanism and religion and travel, and I mean, they put a lot into it. And here's some of the adventures, and I've ran some of these, and I guess that's one of the main problems is if your players have any of the books and the core books, if you try to run games out of it, kind of either have to tell them not to, or you have to expect them not to go looking through the books to find out what's going on and read ahead and figure out what the adventures are. I mean, good players won't do that anyway, or even if they know how it goes, they'll play along and just enjoy the adventure, but not everybody has good players. But there's a lot of setting, a lot of adventures. There's the Croatan. I think that's from the New World, that the disappeared colony of Roanoke before the U.S. was the U.S., I think. But then they have I think even Solomon Kane has a bestiary at the back of the main book here somewhere. Yeah, there's the horrid beasts. And they've got entire separate books for Solomon Kane like they do for all their other settings. There's alligators. And here's what the stats look like for creatures. Agility D4, Smarts D4, and the A in parentheses just means it's animal. It means it doesn't have a D4 human intelligence, it's animal intelligence. Fighting D8. Now, because these aren't named creatures, they're not wildcard creatures, they only roll a D10 to attack, or a D8 to attack with fighting here. They don't get a D6 also and pick the best. So, most of the time, the D8 usually can hit a PC about 50% of the time. Less than that, creatures and people with a D6 are not very competent against PCs, but it happens. Parry 6 is pretty good. Pace 3 is obviously not. Toughness 9 is high. PCs have to do a lot of damage to hit a Toughness 9 creature in order to wound them. They have to do 9 damage, which whenever you do damage, you add your strength to your weapon damage die. Like if your strength is D6 and your weapon's a longsword, which is D8, you roll a D6 and a D8. And you have to get a 9 or better in order to, well, first you'll get a shaken result. And then once a creature's been shaken, then the next damage against it will be wound, which will kill it in the case of these non-named creatures. But it can take a while. Large bears. And each of these things may have their own special things, like improved frenzy and low light vision. That's a pretty standard bestiary, specific to the Solomon Kane or Savage Worlds rule set. And that's actually pretty. And there's Solomon Kane himself. Whoops. I'll go back to that in a minute. Puritan Wanderer, and all his stuff is D8 and D10. He's got like almost every skill. His fighting is D12 plus 2, which is just inhuman. His charisma's +2, pace 6. His parry is 12. I can't imagine. I don't know how you're supposed to hit him. I guess you're not. He does have Code of Honor, Heroic, Loyal, Overconfident, and Vengeful. Look at his edges. He's got like everything there is. I think Wall of Steel is being able to defend with 2 weapons. I'm not sure. There's his rapier, 2 pistols. See, damage is 2d6 +1. Now, the good thing about the firearms in Solomon Kane is you have to reload them. And they're black powder weapons, so it can take a turn or 2 or 3, depending. And he's got a musket and a magic staff. Those stats are just... But, I mean, I guess everybody might want to throw Solomon Kane in for the PCs to meet him, but he's kind of like having Elminster in a D&D game. I guess people could probably appreciate him for a few minutes, but I think he would get old. And there is the character sheet. I understand the point of this, but it just... I would rather have a character sheet be clear with just blank lines. This is the year of our Lord and all this stuff. And I guess you're supposed to circle the die type of your agility and smarts and all this. I'd rather just write in a number, but that's me. And then you have your base over here, and your charisma, and then your mod, and I guess your total. I don't know exactly how people fill these in over here. And your skills, and your gear, armor, weight limits, powers, and which I guess would be your spells, weapons, edges, hindrances, and then your wounds. It's kind of weird that they decided to put it along the side here, kind of in a tower formation, and this INC is incapacitated. You can die in Solomon Kane, I'm sure, because you roll on the incapacitated table and one of the results is death, but I think the default is that you're incapacitated, and it's kind of up to the GM whether he wants to use death or not. And this down here, I think this is ammo, and maybe spell points in other games. I don't use ammo because I hate ammo and spell point tracking. So what I do is I use the rules for allies, which is whenever you roll like a 1 or 2 or something, I make your ammo level go down, which ammo level starts at like 4. And whenever you get to 0, you're out of ammo. But other than that, you don't have to worry about it. So this stuff I don't do anything with that. And that's probably on here since this is an ally sheet. See, here's their skills and gear. It's a much smaller sheet, and it's there. See, here's full, high, low, and out for ammo here. That's what I use for the PCs, or a variation of it. Mine's a little different, but it's the same principle. And like I said, PCs normally control major allies, other wildcard allies, and lackeys, unnamed characters, mooks and thugs and hirelings. And there's the combat summary again. Well, they sure provided enough. And this is all the tables: injury table, fright table. Here's the backlash table for the spell casting if you get double 1s whenever you roll. If you roll a 12, you can get a power surge and actually get a +2. If you roll a 2, though, both 1s again, something from the spirit world has been disturbed. You make a spirit roll at +2 or lose a die in your arcane skill permanently. If the die drops below D4, you permanently lose your arcane background. So you don't have to keep track of spell points, but you can totally quit being a wizard by accident, just on a bad roll. I really don't like that. I mean, there's something to be said for having a bad backlash to counterbalance not having to track spell points and being able to cast spells whenever you want, but just stopping being a wizard, if that's what your character is a bit much to me. Now see this, you suffer a wound, and then you lose your ability to use your powers for D6 days. That seems fine. This may be for a month, or a week, or 2 weeks, or something. I mean, that would be enough to make a player almost want to quit that character, just losing it for 2 weeks. Or even having penalties for 2 weeks. I'd rather do penalty. I'd rather make the character roll at a penalty than lose something that they can do that's part of their character. I don't like that. Other games have that too, is the backlash, and I don't see the point of that. It's like making a warrior not be able to use his sword. I don't see the point of that. And there's healing modifiers and reaction tables for NPCs. There's the object toughness again, in case you missed it the first 2 times. Stealth modifiers. Oh, I never have used that. I probably ought to. Tracking modifiers. And there's ally personality, just in case you can't come up with your own. And the character summary again. And these are burst templates and stuff for... It says you're supposed to put them down on like the map if you're using miniatures. I guess this is like cones for spells or dragon breath or something. And explosions. I don't know. People that don't use maps and miniatures also have just come up with, I think this is 2d4 characters, and this is like 2d8, and they even have some sort of a thing worked out where they've determined what this is. And there's a large burst template. I don't know what those are. And there's the index and the back. $50 for the hardback version. This is a PDF, so it's not that. Which Savage Worlds, the Explorer Edition, is only $10. Well worth the money for a PDF. I didn't buy the hardback, so I don't know how much the hardback for the Explorer is, but $10 is definitely worth it for a full game. I'm leery of paying more than that for a PDF. I'm kind of leery of paying $50 for a hardback of a game myself, but that's me. And for Solomon Kane, for this font in a book, I don't know. But overall, Solomon Kane's a very solid, and Savage Worlds is a solid system. It's pretty simple. It really doesn't have much of a learning curve. The rolling 2 dice and taking the best of the 2, acing, getting raises, which is 4 over the target number. That's pretty much the main mechanics, and then advancing. There's really not much else to that. Other games settings like Hellfrost, you can have races like elves and dwarves and stuff, and they'll have their own specifics. Elves will get like a bonus to their agility and stuff like you would expect. You can only be human in Solomon Kane, and like I said, their magic works differently, but I was impressed with Solomon Kane. I was impressed people liked it as much as they did for where I am running it, being mostly D&D fans, and just the fact that it was fantasy mostly in this place, and also the fact that people were used to D&D, and that they took a liking to the system and to this setting and era. So I'm impressed. I would recommend Savage Worlds for certain. Solomon Kane, probably. I wish the font and the background texture of the pages was more clear, but I would definitely recommend to give it a look at the very least, because the Pinnacle games that make Savage Worlds and Studio Publishing, it looks like, they have is it Studio Publishing? I guess so. They usually have free downloads, so they'd have some free excerpts from Solomon Kane on their site too. Yeah, so try it out if it sounds or looks at all interesting.